Did you hear that?
Yep.
All right, now I'm going to pin you.
Okay.
Spotlight video.
Okay. And let's see, and I'll go ahead and try to screen share, but I'm not allowed to because the host disabled participant screen sharing. So if you want, we can go ahead and just pursue the demo if you'd like. How about that? Okay, we're gonna do the demo. Here we go.
I made you the host.
Oh, you did?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there we go. Hey, I think this might work. All right. So, do we see a painting in front of us? Excellent. This is a California landscape painting, and it's an abstract painting, and that's kind of what my roots are in. It's observational abstraction. You know, there's basically, if you think about it, there's two types of abstraction if you were to simplify it down. Now, of course, in the real world, there aren't. There's all sorts of abstract, right? It'd be unfair of me to say there's only two. But for the sake of explaining what I'm interested in, a way to interpret landscape is through abstraction, and I would consider that to be observational abstraction. So the idea behind my work is that, you know, as a local artist based in, like I was saying, based in the Bay Area of California, there's a lot of fog that comes in and goes out and shifts all the time. So the lighting is always shifting. And during my MFA degree, I really wanted to dive into this more because I would go home during breaks and, you know, whatever, to California, between Ohio and California, and I'd be painting outside here. I'd be painting urbanscaping in Ohio. And there's some places in the world that are really flat, and Ohio is certainly one of them. And kind of being familiar with that, and being familiar with Monterey and Carmel and Salinas, all have different, you know, topology and geography, but there's a lot of open vistas, essentially, and open areas of land out here on the West Coast and in Ohio. And so I ended up, you know, as I have a lot of traditional training in the arts. I've spent a lot of time universities, but also at workshops and art centers, learning from really amazing people. And it's been really interesting because how does one translate maybe a method to an environment where the light shifts? Because, you know, when you're painting a still life or a portrait, you have controlled lighting if you're indoors, right? And so I started to explore ways of dividing and separating areas of the landscape in order to say, you know, I put this brush here maybe at 10:45 a.m. and 15 minutes later, a cloud came in front of the sun. So I'm going to do a totally different color, but on the same painting. So instead of going traditional, where I'd be, okay, you know, it's one snapshot of time, I let the abstract work transition over time and evolve over time. And that pertains to my original thesis in grad school, which has to do with the fact that I believe my work is based on a style of painting that is analogous to the experience of improvisation in jazz music. So for example, I grew up as a jazz drummer, and I'm responding to different musicians and creating motifs and responding to motifs. So I'm using that idea in landscape painting, where I'm responding to the light shift, to the temperature shift, how I feel. I'm responding to the way that the shadows are causing totally different values to occur, you know. And so it's a way to free up, for me, it was a way to free up my approach to landscape painting a little bit more and to get more out of it. And it really helped me a lot. And I think it's informed me of painting as a medium and how to approach layering hues. So there's kind of two applications here. There's the creative kind of exploratory thing, which I just explained, which is the analogy between jazz drumming and improvising on an easel outside. And then there's a technical application, and that's really understanding how the colors layer. So after I give this brief presentation, we'll go over and do a demo, and I'll show you how I like to layer the colors. And part of what I like to do is I like to share what I learn. I think to me, that's a real blessing. I'm really grateful that I get to go out and explore and study and then share with others who are also interested in learning. And I don't really think there's an age limit on learning. I think, you know, anyone who's interested or just enjoys painting can learn. Sometimes it just takes asking the right questions, and sometimes it just takes, you know, finding the right people to vibe with. And I think there's so many artists these days, it can be a little overwhelming to find one's way. But what I like to encourage with anyone is that, you know, you don't have to go far, and you don't have to really go to any place special to really get your paint on. You can start in the kitchen, you know. So observing things in the kitchen and simplifying things down into the basic shapes is really at my core as well. And that it's interesting because if you have a lot of canvases built up, you can of course do paintings over the paintings. And this was a figure piece that I started at the Pacific Grove Arts Center when I was a volunteer there for figure workshops. And it's just cool. And I think a lot of us here, maybe even today, have done this, or have done this a lot more than I have. I don't know. It's an interesting thing because it's a way to start looking at form and shape and line, and seeing the layering process and the color interactions with different layers of wet and dry. I find that fascinating. So what's integral to painting, as we all know, we're all painters here, is drawing. And drawing's kind of an interesting word because it's a little ambiguous. Drawing can refer to composition. It can refer to gestural loose marks. It can refer to very straight, serious marks, you know, or maybe you're a loose person and like straight marks anyways, I don't know. It depends how you're feeling. And for most of us, I'm pretty sure we have what we're comfortable with at this point. And I think that for me, it's just about capturing ideas in a sketchbook. And it doesn't have to be something super refined or fancy. I'm really just trying to look for ideas to capture in person, because there's something that happens when I'm outside observing nature that I can't replicate in the studio as well. And I really enjoy that. And to me, it makes it really special. So these are just some slides from the Northeast where I was this past year. And viewfinders are great for capturing ideas, no matter what the temperature. So for plein air painting, and some of you might recognize this location here over in Carmel. Plein air painting is, some people like to describe painting in general as, oh, it's just drawing with color. And it can be. I mean, it depends what application or what genre you're interested in. For me, at this point, I don't like to plan too much anymore. I like to just go out and feel it. And the reason is because I understand some of the schools of thoughts. I'm certainly not all. I'm certainly no expert in a lot of them, but I do know a little bit about some traditional schools of thought, which I was trained in. And I think that they're very helpful. And I think that, going out and painting, really diving into it doesn't always mean doing something super detailed. It also doesn't mean always going super loose all the time. You can actually do a pretty kind of in-between study. And for me, that really helped, because when I'm discovering composition, I'm thinking about those shapes and how are they interlocking? They're like puzzles. This is an old slide from my studio in graduate school, and I just do tons of these every week, and just gesso up some paper and do some paintings and try to figure it out. And so when I started doing revisiting 2D design in grad school, people were really freaking, because it's like, oh my god, what's he doing? Like why and it's like, well, because I'm interested in the shapes, I'm interested in the relationships, I want to see what's going on. And this is something that some college programs offer for their intro students as a prereq, where you have to learn about composition and design. It's something that I think is really at the core of composition in general, even for realism. And I think that it's long-term very beneficial. So by the way, studio time, when it comes to do stuff in studio time, I only use it for coffee and rain. And or at least I try to. Maybe there's some other things like reading a book, but for me, studio time is really just another chance to focus on something that offers a lot of forgiveness. For example, In the studio, we have controlled lighting. In the studio, we have maybe a more comfortable ground plane to stand on. There's a lot of comfort in the studio that can allow for more focus. And that's where a lot of my larger paintings will happen for sure, is in the studio. And I think that the detail in large pieces tends to come out. Right now, I'm in a kind of a balance between pure kind of landscape abstraction and traditional fine art, traditional oil painting. And I think the balance is important for me because what I've learned is that most old masters created abstract paintings as studies. And I absolutely love that. I think that's too cool. So anyways, without further ado, I'll transition to doing a little demo, and thanks so much for listening to the slides. And we'll do questions maybe during the demo a little bit and leave them in the chat. And
while we're switching over, we do have a question about what size sketchbook you use when you're outside.
Of course, yeah. Gosh, I use small ones, maybe 10 inches or so, usually wide, like a 4 or 5 by 10, something really long and wide. That's very landscapey, right? It's because there's kind of two terms that are used for the style of framing that ends up in the final piece. You're either portrait, which is vertical, or your landscape, which is wide. And if you're really special, someone's out there doing squares. So there's all sorts of ways. It's totally your preference. I like to do wide landscapes, generally speaking. So I hope that answers the question. Great. So I'll go ahead and mute myself. I'll stop the share.
As you're doing this again, from Jennifer Anderson, we have the question, do you create large paintings from the small weekly studies, the oil on paper? So we're still seeing your presentation from your computer.
Yep, stand by.
Okay.
And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go over here. And let me know if can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. And what I'll need to do is go ahead and make sure that you're enabled as the host, I think.
And we do have another question for you.
Okay, stand by. All right, so Bobby should be the host now. And you're staring at my ceiling, which is nice. And there we are. All right, can you see my palette?
I'm still seeing you. So let me look, maybe if I unpin that, cancel spotlight video.
Yep.
And I can spotlight your palette area. Do you want me to do that?
Perfect. Yep. All right. Are we good?
We're good. And we have that one more question.
Okay, great.
Do you create large paintings from the small weekly studies? The oil on paper.
Yes. And thank you for asking. There's a process I go through. One is, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. One is, after sketching, I'll do color studies. After color studies, I do preliminary painting studies. And after that, I'll do a full painting if it's large. And that's only for large paintings. And the reason is because once you go large, there's not a lot of time to be doing any trial and error. And I think that's one of the biggest burdens when you go large is the trial and error. So I try to get rid of the trial and error by doing small studies first. Does that kind of answer the question?
I believe so. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll go ahead and begin. And basically all this is a wood panel. I'm going to show how I think about composition, how I layer the colors, how I mix the colors. It's a gessoed surface. And this is just a glass palette. I'm using the Sari paint and Winsor Newton. If anyone's familiar with these are awesome. And I'm using an iPad only for reference for today because we're not outside. And this is a classic beach vista scene of the West Coast. And I think if any of us go into any of the galleries in Carmel, we see a lot of this type of content. It's just, there's so much of it, and it makes sense because we live here. And then over here is a color wheel, and that's just for reference so you understand what I'm doing. So there's 3 colors here. My objective number 1, is to create an underpainting. Objective number 2 is to layer the local hues on top of that. I'll show you how I do the underpainting first. I'm using these colors. This is Italian Venetian red, and this is burnt sienna, and this is phthalo blue. Now, these approximately chart onto the color wheel as follows. Venetian red or Italian Venetian red is gonna be within the red spectrum. Burnt sienna, and this is interesting because it took me a long time to learn about this. It's actually not so much of a brown or a vibrant brown as it is actually an orange. This is technically an orange, and it fits within this spectrum down here, roughly. So with that being said, if we glance over here and just look at the iPad, the dominant kind of hues here, I know it's dark, but just for simplification, it is pretty much a cool painting. There's a lot of blue. And so when I do the underpainting, I want the underpainting to help my local hues later on, because wouldn't it be nice if our underpaintings helped our colors evolve over time instead of just being the surface we cover up? Because the biggest problem is that it's just an initial layer. We want to help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, I want a warm underpainting in this area because I'm going to put blue over it. And that's going to help. I'm going to be working with opposites essentially. So we're going to go ahead and remove these. And I'm going to blend the phthalo blue, which is really dark in value, right? So you can see how dark that is, and when it spreads out over the glass, it's lighter. I'm going to blend that with some of the Italian Venetian red and a little bit of burnt sienna. And I'm using a little bit of a medium here with linseed and mineral spirits, Gamsol. And once I get this, I think I'm pretty much good to go. And the initial layer, I'm using a fat over lean principle, which means that I'm going to be going in really, really thin with a solvent, which I'm using, again, is mineral spirits. And then over time, I'll use a little bit of medium, which is the linseed and the mineral spirits hybrid. And so when I go here, it's basically as thin as a watercolor. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's the first layer. And I think a lot of us already know that principle, but it's nice to hear it again. I love talking about it because it adds so much to the process and how I think about the process. And I really make sure I know where I'm at. So once I do that, typically what I do is just buff things out and wipe it around. And don't worry, I do have a second panel where we'll be transitioning to for the sake of time. I'm just going to show you how this starts. I use a thing called mark making. Mark making, as I define it with a lot of other academics, is straight lines. And the straight lines help establish the intersection and relationships between certain points. So it's a useful way to think about the initial drawing, because this is essentially an application of drawing. It's just drawing, but it's drawing with paint. And I think this is one of the first things a lot of us have already learned. And again, so it's going to be, it seems a little repetitive, but notice how the advantage of doing it with a brush is you immediately begin to build up your texture and think about ways of breaking up your composition that far exceed the capability of a pencil or even charcoal sometimes, depending on, you know, how you're using those tools, of course. And so once I do that, and I get an idea with maybe like my midtones, if I want to darken anything up, because again, we're dealing with opposite colors, I'm going to go ahead and push towards the hue that's darkest, and that would be the blue. And even here, if you look at my palette, I know the light's in the way, but if you look at the palette, the blue is the darkest thing on here. So I'm going to push everybody towards the blue to get my dark values. And so that's kind of rule number one when I work on my underpaintings, is I always try to push towards the darkest hue to get the darkest value in the painting without you know, completely going blue. And it helps. So once we mix that up, we can go ahead and chisel in areas of dark. and it just really punches in. I just absolutely love how this immediately gives me a roadmap of what I'm looking for. And I'm using straight lines, only straight lines. I think a lot of modern artists and contemporary artists are known for this sort of thing. Watch this. Down and then across. And the reason for vertical and horizontal mark making is that it kind of gets you away, in my mind at least, it gets me away from going towards the curves. I try to avoid the curves. I only do curves if I'm doing gesture drawing, but I try to view this as one big puzzle that I'm just kind of chiseling together in a weird kind of additive way. Chiseling together. Chisel. How about chiseling? Chiseling is a reductive term, I believe, but chiseling together, it's paint. I guess we can make up our own phrases as we go. Anyways, so this is now filling out with my midtone. I'm harmonizing it with the dark phthalo blue mixed in here, and I'm re-adding it as needed. And after I do that for a long time, I'll just say, I'll do this outside, and then I'll bring it in and leave it dry, for a day. It doesn't have to be like super dry, but I'll let it sit inside for a day. And then I'll go back out the next day to do the local hues. So we'll transition to this. This is what it would look like after, an hour or two outside on the beach. So this is the same composition, and you can probably see it a little better, I hope. And what this offers us today is a dry version of what I just started. So in classical terminology, the initial stain of the painting with staining, it's called the imprimatura. And then this is kind of like a underpainting roadmap that has roots in the grisaille method. And the grisaille refers to the grayscale and to value. So here we're only, dealing with value and essentially a value scale. But we're going to do color. So to do color, I'm going to think about the immediate hue that strikes me as, wait a minute, that is definitely not my painting yet. And that would be the blue. Like, keep it simple. Like, if there's blue, get blue. You don't have to do anything fancy. It's amazing how this can be simplified down to just basic wants and needs, just through observing what's there. And at least that's what's helped me. So the problem with phthalo blue, well, not the problem, but the blessing, how about the good thing with phthalo? Phthalo is very flexible. It's very much in the middle of the color wheel. So it's like right there, middle of the blues rather. And so it can go towards green or it can go towards pink and purple. It's very flexible, it goes either way. So when I'm using phthalo blue, I'll mix them up, add some white, and I'll hold it up and see what it's doing. And like, we could go over with a kind of a pure phthalo blue there. That's kind of nice. But, based on what I'm seeing in nature, and based on what's on the screen today, there's actually a lot more purple in this blue. So I'm going to basically add purple to the blue to get that purple blue. So again, it sounds simple, but it's pretty powerful, because if you know that you can go in either direction with the specific hue, you just basically saved yourself buying all this other paint you don't need, and you have a lot of control into the very specific types of blue that you want. And again, there's some blues that you might want, like a cobalt or an ultramarine, that are a little bit more specific, but as a whole, it's not required. So we'll go ahead and mix up some purple. This is Alizarin Crimson. And I'm just going to smear it down here. I'm going to kind of, continue to wipe my knife as I go. And I'm going to only mix in a little bit. And this is getting really, really nice, because it's not as aqua blue or as pool blue, as I like to say. This has more of a muted tone. And if we look at where, our purples and our blues are, they're still very contrasting. I mean, they're not quite opposite, but they're still, there's enough contrast there in the pigment to create a clash, and that's going to dull this color down. So we can just scrape it on and see what that does. And I think that is a great starting point. And we won't necessarily do the whole painting. We'll just see how much we can get done. And I'm going to water that down with the solvent because we're still in thin layer. And with thin layers, you guys, this is called the color blocking phase. For the color blocking phase, I use thin layers. I'm still refraining from majority of the mediums or just pure paint yet, because I'm still trying to figure out and get an understanding of what's going on. But because I did my underpainting, all the values are evident. So I'd like to bring up a quick point as I'm doing this. If you're tuned into social media or whatever is trending in the art scene on the interwebs these days, you'll probably see a lot of painters, especially landscape painters, start with a blank canvas and they won't do an underpainting. That is a very interesting trend to me as one who has done a lot of studying on the underpaintings. I think that it certainly is an effective way to speed up the process. But what I like about the underpainting, and this is key, is that it helps me with the range of values and saturation points of everything I put down. So it kind of starts to take care of itself in a way. There's a little bit less color mixing I have to do because the semi-opaque layer that I put on top is starting to go up and down in value, light to dark in value, according to what's beneath it. So there's a lot of strength there technically, and I think it can help some people. But again, if it's not your thing, that's cool. Painting on a blank surface with pure white is totally cool. So, and now that we have our blue, I'm going to go in with a little bit of medium. And with the medium, the way I do it, and this is the medium. This is linseed with a little bit of, or a little bit of linseed with a little bit of mineral spirits. This is pure mineral spirits. Here's how I do this. I don't dip a brush in here. I only dip the knife, even with paint on it, because it doesn't come off. And I just dip it, and that's all I need. I try to use as little as possible. And then I mix it in. And this now is essentially a fatter layer of paint. It's not pure paint yet, but it's a fat layer because of the linseed oil. And so that is now going to help make some bolder statements. And it's not going to be as transparent because we're now dealing with a little bit more opacity or opaque application here. In the same way I chiseled in the underpainting, I'm going to use the same approach with the color blocking. I'm not going to do any curves. I'm just going to keep on doing these vertical and horizontal strokes. So you can quickly see how this piece could go towards abstraction if you like, or it could go towards traditional painting and totally do fine. And it's because I'm abiding by the roadmap that I did here, the underpainting study, the value study. So after I do my blues in the sky, this is typically where a lot of my beginner students freak out. And the reason is because they put blue down and they think it looks ugly. And the only reason it looks ugly is because it's not harmonized yet. We didn't really put blue anywhere else. So the way to solve this problem is to put blue, in the rest of the painting. So I'm going to look at the image and say, well, the blue kind of goes into the ocean. So maybe there's some blue in here. The blue's kind of in the reflected water. So I'm going to put some blue in the reflected watery sand, the wet sand down here. And this is atmospheric perspective. This dates back to the Renaissance when they initially kind of coined it as a methodology for creating depth. We get a lot of atmospheric perspective in the Bay Area as the landscape recedes into the distance. And so I'm using the blue hue to refer to that in the painting. And then the foreground is usually tricky because depending on what your comfort zone is, some people don't like to put their sky blues in the foreground. I do, at least to start with, to see how the painting's feeling. And to me already, this looks almost close to being a done abstract just because of pushing these colors around. I think that's pretty wild, and that's the tricky part about painting, because as you work, sometimes it takes forever to do something, and then sometimes it takes like 10 seconds and you did this whole, totally different thing. So keeping track of where you're at in the process really helps. Where I'm at right now, well, I did an underpainting. Where am I at after that? Well, I'm in phase 2. I'm in the color blocking. Okay, what am I doing? Well, I added a blue hue. I added blue to the painting. So basically, because the processes are separate, there's underpainting and then there's color blocking. That is why this is working out, because I know where I'm at. Now, I think someone just asked about the drying time, or the importance of letting the, is it important to let the underpainting dry? And the answer is yes. I'll say that again. The underpainting that I did in brown here, this earth tone underpainting, that was dry for a day. Okay, I did an underpainting, let it dry for a day. Then after that, the next day, which would be today, I'm doing the blue hues. Don't get confused. Don't get confused with this. This was just a demonstration in how I do the underpainting first on a separate panel. So please let me know if anyone's confused. I'd be more than happy to explain. So I think we're good with our blue. I think there's only one more thing I'm really interested in, because you know what, we could use the underpainting as our sand color. The only other thing that I'm picking up is red and green. So we have to kind of brainstorm on how to do that. So far, we've used Alizarin Crimson, Italian Venetian Red, Burnt Sienna, and Phthalo Blue. That's a lot of color. You probably don't need to add anything else. That's tons of paint. I try to use a limited palette, which limits itself down to at least 4 hues. What I'm going to do is I want some green in here, but I don't want to add a tube of green. I'm going to mix in green by using the colors I already have. That creates the harmony. The smaller your color wheel is in terms of the relationships, the more harmony there will be. Harmony. And so that's my little hand symbol for harmony, I guess, jazz hands. Anyway, so here's cadmium yellow, Winsor Newton cadmium yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and put it down on my palette. And I'm putting it next to my blue, and yellow and blue make green. So when I mix my yellow and my blue, it gets to be green. Now, here's the next thing, because, it's like you mix green, but then what do you do with it? Because when you hold it up, it's like, wait a minute, that is crazy green. Like, that's really neon. What's going on? So the way to combat anytime you're mixing up a new hue to make sure that it harmonizes with the painting. By the way, harmony refers to the mixing of the different hues. If you're not familiar with that term, mixing of hues to the point where there is an equal or aesthetically pleasing distribution of the same hues throughout the piece. So instead of just mixing up yellow and blue to get green, I have to add in the colors that are here into my green. So to do that, I'm going to squeeze out some more Italian Venetian red, and that will enable me to harmonize the green. So here's our red, Italian Venetian red. That's about here, just so that we are aware. And I'm going to grab a little bit of that red, and I'm going to mix it into the green, just plop it in there. And immediately everything dulls. And it's super scary at first, because what you see is maybe a mud or a brown or something like that. But really what's going on, it's still very green. In fact, look how green that is. It's crazy. So we went from a neon green to like an earth tone green, but this still looks incredibly green juxtaposed to what is already on the piece. So let's go ahead and scrape that on. Be bold. Oh, some blue came off. That's okay. Little reminder to clean my knife. We'll cover that up. And now we're palette knife painting. And I'm still using kind of the horizontal and vertical strokes. And I'm technically using more pure paint than I did before. There's a little bit of medium mixed in here, but it's mostly paint at this point. I'm going pretty thick with the layering because I really like the color. I'm kind of in the upper end of the layering process here. So I'm really happy with how this is going. And so the tricky part really at this point is, like, if there's green in the bottom left where the ice plants are, I know it's dark here, but there's ice plants and it's green. How do we harmonize a painting that has green in the corner, but there's no green over here? There's no ice plants in the ocean. And that's where you have to basically break the rules that of nature in a way, metaphorically speaking. And the reason is because we're going to put green there. even if it's not there. And that seems to be contradictory to this whole idea of, observation, because, if you're supposed to only paint from life and you're supposed to paint exactly what's there, it might seem a little perplexing, like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to paint from life, but then why am I putting green over here? And again, that's where it comes down to color harmony, doing what you're comfortable with as an artist. I think it comes down to who the artist is. And of course, how literal one is in terms of interpretation. I'm a very literal person. So it took me a long time to learn that it's okay to put green in the water. But it's there. And actually the atmospherics are pretty heavy with all the mist, and there's a little bit of green reflecting throughout the image, so it's harmonized. And there is an aqua green here, so we can add some. This is titanium white. I'm going to add that, mix it in with our blue green, and we'll get that aqua thing going. So that's pretty awesome. And we are technically within a limited palette. We're not using a whole lot of colors, but we're kind of on the hairy edge of using a lot. We're using, let's see, Italian, Venetian red, burnt sienna, phthalo blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow, and titanium white. So that's 6 colors. But from those 6, we can create so many. I think a great exercise is to use 2 colors. And this alludes to 3 colors because there's blue, brown, and green on it. But I didn't start with the brown from a tube. I essentially did that from mixing the hues that I had in the primary color tubes, such as cadmium yellow, such as phthalo blue. So does anybody have any questions? Feel free to shout out, or Bobby, if you'd like to coordinate that, just let me know.
So this is Bobby, and I'm just asking, and it might, I guess no question is a stupid question, but do you first plan when you go, will it be abstract or more of the realistic painting? Like when you're approaching this, or does it evolve as you're working?
Like, do I plan for both genres?
For your, do you see where you're going for your final? Like, as you're working through this, do you see something ahead as
Oh,
goal? Or I'm just asking, like,
mm-hmm.
Do you designate this is going to be abstract, or more abstracted, or will it be more realistic?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking. For me, I like to think about it as, if there's a commission or a project that calls for a very specific genre, I'm of course of service to that as a project. So there's a very deliberate approach. In my personal kind of creative thing, which is actually starting to merge with the entrepreneurial side of art, I'm finding that as long as I'm creating these studies, I have the ability to do the abstraction organically and from the heart. I have the ability to do the traditional organically and from the heart. So you could call this a form of planning, or I like to call it just professional practice or just prep work. And I think that for my abstract work, what I will say is that it's much more impromptu. It's much more improv. Like, I don't really plan my abstract work at all. I still might do a couple studies just to see how it feels, but honestly, the best abstract paintings that I've made are just because I enjoy doing it and because I love it, and it's because there's no real preparatory plans. And it's different for everybody. I mean, if you enjoy preparing for abstract work, that's awesome. Like, there's no one way or right way to do things, as we all know. It's whatever's comfortable, and I think that's really important. So I hope that provides some insight.
That does, thank you. And then Catherine asked, do you set a time limit for small painting? It seems to be very popular to paint very quickly.
Oh man, thank you for asking. That's an awesome question and a great topic. I'll try to explain my thoughts on it, at least. It depends on what phase in life you're in with your paint. With your paint. It's kind of a funny thing to say. It depends on what phase you're in. for learning painting, if you really want to go through a phase where, you know what, I'm going to take away everything I know and start from scratch, I strongly recommend doing time sessions. And the reason is because I think that the time sessions force us to, and that's myself included, I'm part of this craziness of art as well. It just forces all of us to think about how these shapes are interlocking. You know, I think one of the challenges of what I'm doing right now is that it might look really brushy and really kind of loose and kind of like, okay, you know, it's just kind of dabbing paint around. But the way I'm thinking about this in terms of shapes. It goes back to the color studies. It goes back to composition studies, the composition studies in paper in my slide. I think that setting a timer allows for us to think about how fast can we get these sections in? How fast can we get these shapes in? And that's a great way to reprogram your brain, because you start thinking in terms of shapes. You're not worried about the aesthetic anymore. But if you're like, you know what, I'm comfortable with a lot of the ways that I paint and I just want to learn more, but there's a lot of societal pressure because everybody seems to be painting as fast as they can, and there's the plein air conventions and all this stuff going on. Honestly, sometimes I've had to tune out of all that a lot lately. I really don't. I'm not really not too interested in how fast other people paint or how slow they paint, unless there's something really creative or personal that they want to share with me in a painterly or artistic relationship, because it's none of my business. And you know, if they want to share, you know, hey, it takes me a long time to do this, I'm like a Van Gogh, or I'm like a or whatever, you know, take your time. That's great. That's awesome. I never ask, but for me, I'll be very open, because basically it's like, there are some paintings, I think we all have this experience, where things go so quickly and we don't know why they went quickly. And it's part of the mystery of the paint. But what I've started to learn is that there are certain ways to layer your paint. And one thing I'm doing right now is a thick palette knife thing. That's impasto. And I know for a fact that because I did the thin underpainting, I just cut out a lot of time, saved myself time, because now I only have to focus on the color. I don't have to focus on the values as much. That's already done. We're doing semi-opaque layering. The values still come through. So that can cut your time in half almost. But it depends on the painting. There's some large paintings that will take me months and months and months and months, and amazing. So anyways, but let me know if that provides a little bit of insight. I know I talk a lot, and please feel free to re-ask the question.
Hearing you talk is great. That's amazing. You're painting and talking at the same time too. But sorry, that's Bobby's amazement. But Tamara asked, how crucial is using a good quality panel?
Awesome. Great. Thanks for asking. So basically, let's talk real quick about surface, because good quality of the panel pertains to the type of panel material, as I'm interpreting it. And basically, I think this is some sort of hardwood. Let me check. Here it is. Cradle birch. So this stuff is like any wood panel you paint on directly is going to be pretty porous, and it's going to absorb the paint. So what I do is I, just use some gesso, acrylic gesso, because you can do oil over acrylic. I use acrylic gesso, that's the white here. And I do that on most, if not all, panels, because it prevents the paint from becoming like a clay. I've had experiences with students where they'll take just raw wood and they'll paint on it, and then all the mineral spirits and the linseed gets absorbed into the panel, and the paint becomes like a clay because it's being dehydrated essentially. Now that doesn't always happen. In fact, there's some wood that you can seal, and there's actually some hardwoods I think that are really, really awesome just for direct painting. Birch is actually really awesome for direct painting, and it doesn't absorb the paint too much, and so you can still kind of push it around, but I prefer to gesso it just to provide that protective layer. So the quality of the panel, I would say, is depends on the type of absorbent or non-absorbent surface you're working on. So that will determine how you can push your paint around. If you're layering paint, on a wood panel, it should start to be able to be a little easier to push it around. You know, I'm doing at least 3 to 4 layers on this panel right now, but it's on top of gesso, so it's so easy to just slide around. You know, it's kind of like skating around in a really slick surface.
If there are others who would rather ask a question rather than type it out, you're welcome to unmute yourself. And when you're done, I will mute you.
And I'll go ahead and continue explaining a couple key factors here. And that is that as I build up marks in the piece, it's definitely a back and forth, and I really want to pay attention to where my darks and lights are. And the value scale is something that I keep on myself just to know where I'm at. And typically I try to stay in the middle of the value scale. If I want to create a focal area or contrast within the piece, this is what I do. This contrast is defined by the following. You take 2 ends of the value scale and you smush them together. That's contrast. That's a high contrast. This is less contrast, and then all the way to very little or no contrast. And so if I'm thinking about how I want my viewer to interpret the painting, I know that I kind of want strong marks towards the center or across the horizon. And so I'll go pretty high contrast in terms of value and really lay that in there. And that can help the viewer know where to look. And I strongly encourage anyone who's interested in abstract painting to use this principle. I think abstract painting is something that should be explored a lot more than it has. I think that there's kind of an interesting hyper attention to getting students to draw from life all the time, and I think that's really important. But I think abstract painting allows us to look at drawing in a totally different way. So anyways, that's just something about contrast. And I want to revisit harmony real quick. We did this in a warm underpainting, so the green is now really standing out almost a little too much. So I'm going to tone it back down with the underpainting hue, and that would be the Italian Venetian red mixed with the burnt sienna, and then tinted a little bit or toned a little bit with the phthalo blue. So red's toned down with blue, and make sure that we mix in that, and I can just scrape in there. And isn't it funny? That just doesn't stand out in a bad way. It really goes nicely with the painting. And it's because everything's harmonized. I can go as strong as I want with this stuff anywhere. Let's say we go towards more of an abstract now, and it's just gonna sing. And I'm not feeling uncomfortable with it. I'm very comfortable. I'm very at home doing this because I know that no matter what I do with my marks, it's going to work out. And that's because everything is harmonized, So it's a lot of fun to just maybe do a few studies a week, come up with a schedule. I mean, that is such an awesome thing to do. Think about, maybe there's 2 days a week you go out, you paint, and you come home and you're like, well, I did, something interesting outside. I'm not really happy with it. What can I do? Bring it back home and scrape it up. Bring it back home. Detect what colors, figure out what colors you were using, if you can keep track, and go back into painting with them. I mean, there's so many things you can do. I can wipe and scrape all day and create these really cool marks. And so it's a way to break your painting up. Now, in terms of the application of the marks, I'm very vertical, horizontal, or I'm dab, dab, dab. But with wiping and pushing around, that's where I like to use more swooping or curvature. And, at this point, when you do that, the colors really harmonize because you're now mixing on the surface. And so real quick, because I know we're about an hour into this, basically, there's 2 areas to mix your paint. You can mix here and then transfer to your painting, but you can also mix directly on the surface. And that to me is incredible, because the painting becomes your palette in a way. You know, it becomes this kind of life-sustaining force that creates these vibrant hues. So now that we have this, I'm going to do one more thing, and I think that should complete the painting a little bit more. And I say a little bit more because a painting, sometimes it takes me, a few days to be satisfied. And if you're working on a large piece, it might take you a lot longer to be satisfied because we keep on tweaking, but knowing when to stop is hard. What I'm looking for is contrast. So I'm going to reestablish my values just a little bit. Here I go. Dark brown, phthalo blue, and Venetian red, and a little bit of burnt sienna. So I'm reestablishing my values. And boom, I'm done. So that to me is a great abstract piece that I could go back into if I wanted. And depending on the time of day, I could do different colors. I could slowly push myself around the wheel if I wanted to and see what happens. It's really exploratory, and I think it's really freeing. So things to remember today are underpainting, let it dry for at least a day or more. That gets all your values. The second thing is know where your colors are in the wheel. Know the opposite relationships and how they help each other out. If you want to do something pink, then do something underneath it with green. If you want to do something orange, do something underneath it with blue, and vice versa. Most underpaintings are warm because of the Venetians and the Florentines and the Renaissance and all that. But really, you can do anything you want. Just understand there's a relationship that you can operate on, and then understand that there's fat over lean, so thick layers of paint with medium over thin watered down mineral spirits. And then impasto, I love doing impasto with the knife, and I love doing impasto with the brush. Those impasto refers to thick strokes that are really aggressive and go on the top of the painting. All right, so should we switch it over to the big screen here? All right. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Great. I think we survived. Awesome.
Better than survived.
Good. So let me know if you have questions, and it's I think one of the challenges of painting is that it can be a very ambiguous, kind of very, very abstract domain of expertise. We're painters, but it can be simplified, and I think it can be. I think it can be broken down. There's so many ways to teach it, and I hope that today showed a little bit of how I like to think about both traditional and abstraction, because I think some of the terms I used are relevant to both fields from what I know and who I've worked with. So let me know if you have questions. And Bobby, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, we're seeing some things there in the comments. Catherine thanked you for your thoughts. She had asked you about the speed of painting, and your demonstration is very helpful tomorrow. Well, very well done. Thank you. Nice step-by-step process. Could you tell us about some of the things Ben also teaches at CSUMB or through CSUMB, and about something that pertains to me and maybe to some of you, 50 better?
Yeah, tell you a little bit about that. So there's a course that I'm teaching this fall in October for CSUMB, and we're going to be doing plein air painting. And so we're going to be outside and enjoying the amazing light shifts that we have, and basically, trying to be okay with the light shifting, because sometimes when you get out there, it's like you're in a class and the instructor's telling you to do something and you're like, oh boy, but the light just shifted, and so everything he just did totally doesn't pertain to me. But that's why it's really laid back, and I try to keep everything very open. So a lot of the participants, I've gotten some emails, some people might be using watercolor, some people might be doing acrylic or gouache. It's whatever they're comfortable with. And that's kind of what I did this past summer in Vermont at an art institution out east, because the way I like to present the workshops or short courses with adults or people who have a little bit of experience, or maybe they're mature enough to know that, they can kind of do their own thing. The best medicine for any of us at that level is do your own thing. Like, let it out, because my only purpose is to help. And that's the only thing I want to do. And I want to help people as much as I can as pertains to my dyslexia, because I know what it's like, to need help and to receive help. So I like to share. That's kind of my message with the class. And so this October, we're going to be really exploring a lot of what we did today. But the cool thing is that we'll do some different mediums, and I'll be kind of adjusting my instruction per student. It's possible. And in fact, for large classes, I think we have 16. It's not large, but there's a lot of people. The way that I think, and this is for all instructors, there is time to spend time with your students. There's a way to talk to them, and literally just go say hi and just go talk to them. And that's my experience at Ohio Wesleyan. That's my experience at Bowling Green State University. That's my experience at the Pacific Grove Arts Center. That's my experience everywhere. Just talk and ask questions. So yeah, it's exciting.
Are you seeing the question that Catherine just asked about when does the October class begin in October, and when can we register for it?
So great question. So quick notice about that. The class has already filled. So I'm bummed and I'm excited. I'm bummed because I'd love for it to be something that we can all just hop into right after this to continue the journey because it's fun and it's a great way to learn and explore. But if there is interest in workshops, I offer workshops. I'm open, and I'm always happy to work with whoever wants lessons. So don't be a stranger, reach out. And if you want to work from home and that's where your comfort is, I teach online. There's no worries. I've had a big year of teaching online. Holy moly. With how things are going. So it's not impossible. There's possibilities. But yeah.
I was just looking to see how's the best way to contact you.
Thank you for asking. The best way to contact me is my email. And I should have had that as a big thing that I post up here, but email me, fineart.ben@gmail.com. So that's fineart, F-I-N-E, fineart, is that A-R-T, right? Fineart dot, little period, and then Ben, B-E-N, @gmail.com. And if you need to reach out, I'm pretty sure you can contact Bobby, if you're okay with that, Bobby, and you get my email from her. So I'm really friendly in my emails. I answer as quickly as I can. I learned that from a really one of my heroes growing up, who was an illustrator, who was just an amazing illustrator, and he got back to me every time I emailed. And so I've taken that as a role model, and I get back as soon as I can. So
that's actually an interesting thing. Sorry, everybody, you can ask questions, but who do you look to? Who are your heroes, or, in the present and in the past?
Yeah, man, I have so many. Where do I begin? How about we begin with Paul Cézanne? Paul Cézanne, if you look at his paintings of apple still lifes, wow, amazing work, exquisite. It's exquisite. It's Paul Cézanne offers a whole different way to look into perspective and perspectival drawing. And now there might seem to be a little bit of irony here, because he's a modern artist, historical modern artist, early modern artist, very early, and he's working with very dynamic, abstracted composition. So when I say the word perspective, what am I referring to? Well, he would take these apples and these tablecloths and all sorts of interesting kind of everyday things. And the way he would interpret that is that he would totally bend the rules on purpose. Not to say that, and I cannot speak for Mr. Cézanne, but he definitely was aware of what he was doing. I don't mean that in a criticism or anything like that, because I think when I say that, you know, oh, he was calculated. I'm not saying that at all. He was very much a creative guy who took perspective to the next level, I think. So Paul Cézanne, and if you look at those thick impasto style strokes, oh my gosh, I just love that. And so that's for early modern art. I love the expressionists. I love the impressionists, Monet, Manet. But the thing is that for traditional art, this is where my heroes become a little bit more, let's say, widely spread throughout history. And the reason is because I don't think that there was any one specific time period of great art. I think it's all great. And I think going back to the Paleolithic, the Neolithic, I think it's all great. And, you know, it's interesting looking at who was doing what in Europe throughout the 1700s and the 1800s, because with the development or the invention of photography in the 1800s, and again, invention, technically there's people who say that photography comes way earlier, the origins are way earlier, that's fine. But really photography is something that you can physically comprehend as a tool, aided the painters of the 1800s. So it's the painters of the 1800s who had a lot of realism and a lot of tendency to go towards a realistic depiction of nature. And there were some Europeans that were petrified of painting outside. They couldn't do it. And this is 1800s. It's all they had. But they were so scared because they were scared of the light shift. And it was basically the one kind of obstacle that prevented them from reaching their dreams. And honestly, it's the culture is so different back then. A lot of it was pretty uptight, and a lot of those guys were going to academies. So, you know, if the expectation is you're going to go do something realistic, and then your whole academy, and you're an 1800s European academy, there's a lot of peer pressure. And so having the courage to go outside, that's, you know, thank God modern art happened. You know, modern art it's so important. I can't stress how important modern art is. It enables any realist or any traditional painter to go beyond what the rules were. And what I like to tell my students is there's no rules, man. You know, it's what you want to do. I can provide methods to help, and I'll do my best to provide some guidance, but the rules, you know, that's your thing. It's very personal. So, yeah. So Paul Cézanne and any old master, you know, there's a lot of great Russian and German and British artists. And there's a really great Spanish guy, his name, Pierre, or I'll have to look him up. There's a really good one. All right, did anybody else have any questions? Quality. I'm trying to keep a track on the chat.
Okay. This is Bobby again. So I am curious, you talk about light shift, and you go out one day and put down your beginning, to your painting, and then you let it dry and you come back a second day. How do you address that light shift problem that we seem to have, even going, if you're wanting to complete a painting in a day, so please.
Yeah, so the light shift is, why is the first thing I started asking myself, because that's an awesome question, and it was such an interesting thing to learn about through working with realist painters in grad school. My thesis advisor was some people call him a hyper realist, but he's really, he is more comfortable with the title of realist, I think. It's really, disclaimer, it's up to him, but he did realism. He did stuff that was very photographic, but very emotional. And, light shift and that type of work is a challenge. So working in a stable environment provides that concrete roadmap for your values, right? So with any sort of what can we deduct from this, right? It's like, if the most convincing painters out there in terms of realism are creating this imagery that is so believable, Why is that? And I think it comes down to the value. I really do. I think lighting is everything. I think that lighting determines how the painting is structured compositionally. And that's why if you go out to like the beach in Carmel or Monterey or Silmar, wherever, like just over the course of 2-3 hours, the light changes so much. So with that being said, what are your chances of painting something that's super realistic in an environment that is constantly changing? And I think they're pretty good, but they're also kind of slim depending on the weather pattern. So what I ended up doing, just kind of ramble on this, the way that I started to do realism outside to tackle light shift was I started to keep track of when I would go out and how much overcast weather there would be. In California, at least in the Bay Area, it's fairly consistent. We don't really get snow here in Carmel or Monterey, right? So, I mean, inland, I think in the valley, you get a lot of snow up higher altitudes, but it's so consistent seasonally out here. There's a lot of consistent weather. There's a lot of fog, but the light shift is dependent on the clouds. It comes down to clouds. So if it's mostly overcast, you're in luck. If there's a lot of clouds, you're in luck because you're not going to get any hard shadows. So you can actually kind of relax, take a deep breath, drink some tea, and you can paint your painting in an overcast environment pretty relaxed because there's no sharp contrasting shadows that are moving everywhere all the time. In a bright sunny day, we get all these hard edges and shadows. And that can be a challenge if you're used to still life or figurative painting. It changes your roadmap on the painting. It changes your values. It changes your underpainting. It changes your understanding of where your hues are supposed to go. And so that's the main challenge. I think that the hardest days to paint on for me, from my experience, are sunny days, and specifically days that are towards the middle, towards noon. Anything towards evening's fine, anything early in the morning's fine, but noon, oh my goodness, it's like you have, talk about speed painting, it's like you got an hour before the light dramatically shifts. So I don't advise lunchtime painting.
This is Marley. I was noticing that your underpainting did a lot. You decided warm versus cool. You chose a warm values you established, and shapes and how they interact were also part of that. And also the way you compose the canvas. So it seems to me that your underpainting is doing a lot of important stuff. And so it seems to me that you must have spent a lot of time thinking about it or looking at your reference, or, there's more prep than just sitting down and mixing something up and putting it on paper.
Right. Oh, totally. No, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for the conversation in that area. Yes, the answer is yes to everything. I've spent a lot of time thinking. It drove me nuts, actually, in grad school, the underpainting. Why is an underpainting important? Because I was dealing with faculty at the university who really offered me the opportunity to question what I know. And that's I'm very thankful to teachers, because teachers help us move forward. Good teachers help us move forward in learning and questioning our values and our beliefs, I think, and being open and being comfortable with exploring new things. So the underpainting was one of those really sensitive areas in me that I wanted to explore, mostly too, because I spent a lot of time at the PG Arts Center with Warren Chang. Is anybody familiar with Warren Chang? Okay, so yeah, I was his assistant for a short time between undergrad and grad school for the figure workshops. And Warren is a very traditional painter, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart as a compliment. I think that he is a wonderful, wonderful artist, and it's people like that who really, they offer a lot when it comes to underpainting techniques, and imprimatura and grisaille and you name it. So I say that as a one who admires Warren. And then in terms of my teachers, I was very fortunate to meet Mark Farina, who I did a brief mentorship program with, and I still consider a mentor. And he does incredible work with the way he organizes his compositions. And he's just another wonderful artist who incorporates underpainting method style techniques that are not maybe explicitly underpainting. Again, I don't want to speak for Mark. I speak as a friend and only as an admirer. And he has his own way of painting, but a lot of these guys pay homage to the old masters, and they pay homage to traditions that have been developed over years and years and years and years of art schools in Europe. So, I mean, we have some good ones in America, historically speaking, such as the Hudson River School and such. And there's a lot of really great Western painters, and we're in a pretty historically rich environment, maybe within the past century in the Bay Area with all the California landscape painters. But a lot of those guys weren't necessarily doing underpaintings in California in the past 100 years. A lot of them were doing what they were interpreting from the European modern artists of the early 20th century. So anytime I see a historical California landscape painter, my expectation is probably going to be more modern, maybe a little less emphasis on the underpainting. But again, hopefully from today, what we can get from this is that you can use an underpainting to help you plan for your abstract work as well. So, yeah. Hope that answers some, or at least provides some insight in how my brain works. It's kind of all over the place with paint. And then I'll just say real briefly, I think that printmaking has played a really strong role in the mark making that I use. And because when you're spending hours carving or engraving or using an etching needle or whatever you're doing, that's a lot of physical work, a lot of physical labor. And so I think that is relevant to how I choose to use the word chisel, when I'm using the brush or the palette knife, for sure. So, and just out of curiosity, Bobby, do you have any favorite artists or people that you like specifically, or are you a modern art fan? Are you a traditional old master fan? I am curious.
That's funny that you're asking about me, but yeah, basically it's funny, growing up it was Cezanne and the Impressionists at that time, Manet and Monet, and it's funny as I've gotten into the better years, as you say, after 50, now I go and I was able to go to the Met. I was able to go to the National Museum of Art, and I've been able to go different places. And now just standing in front of painting just brings tears to my eyes. There's just this overwhelmed feeling. And I basically, I'm getting that at this time now too, Ben. I really am thankful for this time that we've had together. And it's really been encouraging, fascinating. I love hearing your brain. I think everybody here enjoys it too. And I know there's disappointment that your workshop is, and that you're doing your class in October is full. So getting to be practical, do you have a wait list perhaps for the next time that you do a class like this, or how do we get on that?
Yeah, basically I'll have to coordinate with the folks who are, running the event and understand if there is a wait list. And I can certainly let you know, Bobby. And then in terms of workshops, I think that there's a couple ways to go about that. And one of them is to keep an eye out for things that I'm doing in the area through an art center or through a university. That's one way. So that's through an institution. The other way is I offer stuff independently of those institutions as well.
Okay.
As my own thing. So it's whatever people are comfortable with. It really comes down to comfort level and whether you want to work online or whatever you want to do.
So October is with the class is out in the open, and then is that that's a class, so that's probably like so many times a week or once a week. For a workshop,
Mhm.
you would do a 1 day or a 2 day. What do you suggest?
Yeah, so for that class, we're meeting just a few times in October. For that program, it is considered a class based on how that program chooses to teach their students. To me, it's like one big workshop because there's a lot of time to kind of go home, do your thing, come back to class. But the way I do workshops is I recommend 2 days, just a couple hours each day, and we kind of pick a time that works, either morning or afternoon. And I've been doing them. I've done some private stuff on the beaches. Those are great. And you just show up, and we get our paint out. I usually provide viewfinders for everybody. You can bring your own equipment, but I always like to just give out your little class gift, which is a little viewfinder. And we just start looking around and thinking about how can we mark this place up. And it's fun. I think, honestly, I'm more comfortable going out in public as a painter than anything else. Cause like I'm in my zone, like if I go out, I'm in public, I'm painting, I feel invincible. It's like a superpower. It's, what if someone asked me to leave? Well, I was just painting,
Right. Better than drumming, huh? You also are a jazz drummer, so you've got that.
Yeah, no,
Painting your drums, huh?
right. Painting and drums, drumming and art. Drumming, they'll probably ask you to be quiet, but painting, it's very quiet. So
I've seen some people like doing more than hinting at trying to do a workshop. The workshop coordinator person that we have is not on this call at this time, but I'm interested, and I'm going to see what we can do to make that happen.
I would love to pursue that, Bobby, and I will keep in touch with you regarding that idea, just to see if that's an option. And I'm very open to any suggestions or any insight anyone has. And I hope that we can do it. I think it'd be a lot of fun, and it'd be a great way for me to meet everybody. We're still, I think, even though we're on Zoom, it's still kind of a virtual environment, so it's a little different. So.
Exactly. Well, we thank you so much. You've had your chance to ask questions, and I thank you all for letting me ask my questions like I've had. I can't even say enough. Thank you so much, Ben.
Oh, thanks so much, Bobby. It was my pleasure, and it was a privilege to share with you all today. I wish we could do it more often. I think that a lot of us artists are aware of the importance of staying connected and sharing. So I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for attending with us.
Great.
And we're seeing little thank yous pop up on the screen, but thank you so much, Ben.
You're very welcome. Excellent. All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.